Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday check-in with me, Pastor Brian. It is so great to be with you as we have been together for weeks and months and what seems like years now. We're trying something new this week, and you'll see someone who's not me on your screen, which I know for many of you is just a welcome sight. So this is Trevor Vaughn, and some of you may know Trevor Vaughn because he used to actually be the pastor at Farmers Chapel here in Indianola, is now at West Des Moines United Methodist Church. And he's going to talk a little bit today about a ministry that I won't go into because he's going to, but called Bar+Church. And I love new and exciting ministry opportunities and ways that connect people in new ways. And so I want you to introduce yourself, Trevor. I'm friends with him, so I can ask him to do things sometimes, I guess. So introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about Bar+Church, and maybe tell us what your position is at West Des Moines and how this interacts with that.
Yeah, you bet. Well, like Brian said, I am Pastor Trevor Vaughn, the associate pastor at West Des Moines United Methodist Church in West Des Moines. Let me start with Bar+Church right away. So Bar+Church is what it sounds like. It is church meeting in the bar. And we actually started that here in Indianola. When Heel House was first forming, they came to, my wife was kind of on the team that helped them get started. And they were asking folks for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches so that they could kind of canvass the area, bring some food and some items to folks who might be without a home. And one of the things they asked for was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And having gone to ILIF School of Theology in Denver, I got to worship with a man named Jerry Herships, who ran a church called After Hours in Denver. And at Jerry's church, they meet in a bar, they make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and they talk about God and their faith and in such a unique way. And so when Heel House asked for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I said, I have an idea. And so I just completely stole Jerry's idea. So thanks, Jerry. And I put on Facebook, hey, let's make some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. If you show up to the Zoo Bar in Indianola, this pastor will buy you a beer if you help make some sandwiches. And I thought I might have like 5-10 of my friends who'd come. We had 30 some people show up, and people just kept bringing bread and peanut butter and jelly. Heel House asked for 30 sandwiches. We made over 700 sandwiches that first day. And so Heel House ended up taking 40, and then we took the rest up to Joppa in Des Moines. And Joppa was excited to have them, and they said, hey, this is great, but how about like 100 to 200 sandwiches a week instead of 700, you know? And I said, well, let me talk to these people and see if we can do something. It was just an exciting moment where we all made these sandwiches together and just had natural conversation. And when you're in a bar with a pastor and the pastor's having a beer, questions just come up, you know? And so we talked about faith, and it was good. And a majority of those folks were excited and said, can we do something like this again? So then we decided to turn it into a regular meeting time and got a little more concrete with things, set ideas, set things, topics of conversation. And we continue to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You want me to keep going here? Or?
Yeah, well, I love what you say about just like things come up in maybe a different way. So I'm curious what, like, so you work in a church and you know, things look different now for sure, but you know what that kind of looks like. What is different about that space, talking about faith in a bar, other than, you know, we just might not think of that as a place to talk about faith?
Yeah. I think, well, let me start by saying, I think it is still church. And I think church in a bar and church worship building space should look fairly similar. And not the like, let's carry traditions that don't work into the bar space. But I mean, as far as kind of openness and an ability to talk about real things. So I think I would say what's most meaningful about or unique is that folks really, when you're in a bar, it's just an environment where you are free to kind of say what's on your mind, maybe to ask a question that you've always wanted to ask, or bring something up in conversation. I would say folks are pretty vulnerable and willing to share what's really on their hearts and minds. Sometimes we go to church, and in my experience as a pastor, we go to worship on a Sunday morning, and, we're getting ready. If you have kids, maybe you're getting the kids ready, and you're trying to keep them in line and, like listen to a sermon and kind of present yourself in a certain way, I think. And I don't always mean it in like a bad way, but, we want to be able to worship, and we dress nice, and we, I don't know, there's an element of like making yourself look good. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. And maybe being at Bar+Church at a different place removes barriers, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it drops the barriers down. And especially, when they see the pastor order a beer or take a drink from a beer, they're like, oh, okay. And it's just like more down to earth, and it's just kind of free flowing conversation. I don't know it in, just historically, there's probably this weird barrier that like pastors could be up on this like pedestal somehow. And I mean, like our sanctuaries are designed that way, and here's a way to say, no, like we're all on this faith journey together, even your pastor. The main difference is I get paid to think about these things all day. Right. And you have to do it as a spiritual discipline. So maybe in fact, you're even more faithful than your pastor. And I don't know, it's just these conversations kind of flow well, and people are ready to, and people are surprised when you're encountering God in a bar. And even folks from the outside, I think, are surprised. I had one person tell me, oh, I'm so glad you're bringing Jesus to that bar. And I'm like, I think Jesus is already there, actually. I think we're surprised when we see that God is already moving in this space.
Yeah. And maybe even in that moment of saying Jesus was already here, we might not always think that way.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, we don't talk about evangelism very much as United Methodist, and we certainly probably don't talk about it in terms of like going to a bar and evangelizing, but thinking about, if we were to think about evangelism as building relationships and deep relationships, do you think that work happens in a special way in this Bar+Church that you're involved with or leading?
Yeah, I do think so. And I'm glad that you framed evangelism that way, right? Because it's not like I'm going in and saving souls in this like way, or telling people they shouldn't be drinking. Now, I've encountered folks who, from the outside, I might say they might have an alcohol problem. But also, if that's a reality, you can't just as a stranger tell someone they have an alcohol problem anyway, right? You build relationships. So one of the things we did is we made sure we were connected to some AA communities, so that if we did come across somebody who needed us to like build another step in this relationship, that we had that in our pocket. And I have a guy at my church in West Des Moines who's very connected to the AA community. And he said, I'm your guy. Like I'll be such a good buffer for someone who is struggling and might not think they need AA. And so having those relationships are important. But I really think people are used to going to a bar because there's a sense of community there that's not judgmental, and they can just kind of relax. And so you're going into the space and saying, I'm here to relax with you, and tell me your story. And I have had so many stories told to me, not just the people who show up specifically to Bar+Church, but even if when I go up to the bar to get a beer, I had one guy say to me, hey, you're that effing pastor, right? And I said, yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I'm that guy. And he said, sit down and take a shot. I want to tell you my life story. And I said, okay, I don't really take shots. Like I'm more of a beer guy, but you can buy me a beer and I'll listen to your life story. And he said, no, you're going to take a shot and you're going to listen to my story. And I said, well, I guess it's the pastoral thing to do. So he bought me a shot and I got a glass of water, and I sat there for probably 20 minutes while he just told me about his story. And I was just in awe that he's been hurt by the church, and he's valid his kind of fears for the church, but he's raising a family and he wants his kids to be involved in church, and he just doesn't know how to bridge that gap, and he doesn't want them to be hurt like he's been hurt. And after he told me his story, he said, thanks. You've been coming here for a few months and I've been trying to get the courage to come talk to you and I just couldn't. And what I found is it's not just building relationship with the folks who are gathering around the table intentionally to talk about faith and do some service project, but it's the other folks you encounter as well, who like they have a story and they're eager to tell it. And so to me, that's evangelism, right? Like you said, building relationship.
And I wonder if you would have heard that story any other way than being there.
Right.
That's really profound. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And for those that watch this, that might think, gosh, I still just don't know if we, as Christians, should be around bars and should be hanging around with those kinds of people. Well, I think you could point to, you could start by pointing to where Jesus was and who he hung out with, and also weddings he went to and turned certain water into certain other beverages for people to enjoy, to have community and to build relationships. And so I just want to offer that disclaimer in case any of my folks are watching this and wondering, gosh, I just don't know. I think there's fruit to be born.
Yeah. And Bar+Church definitely isn't for everyone. And I mean, just like with anything, if you know that you have a problem or you're prone to addiction or overconsumption, you got to know yourself and set your boundaries. Yeah. And Bar+Church isn't for everyone. We had, I will give a shout out to a member of Farmers Chapel, Phyllis, who I think is in her early 90s. She pulled me over one day and grabbed me by my ear and said, after worship when I was pastoring there, and she said, "Young man, tell me about this Bar+Church." And I thought she was going to give me the what for. And so I told her, and she said, "Okay, that's all I needed to know." And I didn't hear from her again about it. And then a couple weeks later, two young gentlemen showed up to Bar+Church and said Phyllis sent them. Right. And so Phyllis knew Bar+Church wasn't for her. But she knew it was for others. So
that's great. Well, I want to get in one more question before we finish up here. And that is, thinking about just how you think about ministry in general, or in particular to your ministry at West Des Moines. What has Bar+Church taught you about, ministry in other settings, or maybe more normal kinds of church?
Yeah. Good question. When I started Bar+Church in Indianola, I had been in this community for 8 years prior. So I had built relationships with folks here. So when I got to West Des Moines and the church we met, we talked about potential new ministries to do. We decided to give this one a shot. So we gave Bar+Church a shot in West Des Moines. Now, what was unique is I didn't know anybody in West Des Moines, right? New to this community, new to this church. And so the people who came to, as we started Bar+Church, were church people. And, it's not like our, I would say the demographic we thought we would reach, when you started Bar+Church, but that's who came. And what I learned quickly, even from hearing the stories of these church people, is these are people who are actually pretty involved in the church, yet they're on the edge. They're straddling this. I want to be committed to church. I want to do this, but something about it is not, it's not enough. And so Bar+Church for them was an opportunity to dive deeper. So this group became we talked about, we're going to raise the bar. That's going to be our Bar+Church. We're still going to, enjoy a beverage, but we're going to raise the bar in conversation, since this is mostly folks who go to church. And we started talking about justice issues and really challenging ourselves with hard questions. So I would say what I'm learning is there are folks who are deeply committed to kind of our traditional church. There are folks who are completely outside of it. And there are these folks who kind of ride the line. And maybe that we kind of swing on this pendulum even, right? These from being, we can find ourselves committed to not knowing if this is exactly all we wanted it to be. And by what we really mean is we want to encounter God in a deeper way. And we want to find all the ways that we can do that. And even the folks outside the church are looking to encounter God. And for one reason or another, the local church seems to have can seem to have a barrier, where whether it's hard to enter, right? You're coming into this like big place of traditions and wondering if you can fit in. But I would say all of these people that I have met are looking to encounter God in some way. And so I guess that you can hear like churched and unchurched, right? Like these words, but I think we're all on this very similar journey together. Yeah.
Amen. Amen. You know, I think a lot of ministry is about creating space, and I am so glad and overjoyed that you are making this space along with all of your co-patriots in doing this. So thank you for letting me waste your time a little bit and hearing about Bar+Church. And I hope that our folks who are watching this will continue to check in and continue to check out Bar+Church. I do know you have a Facebook page, right? If people want to learn more.
Yes, we do.
And maybe be involved at some point.
Yep, Bar+Church on Facebook, and Bar+Church plus spelled out.com.
Okay. I'll make sure that gets linked in. Yeah, we would love for people to be involved with that. All right. Well, thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, Brian.
Take care.